Hello there. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. If you are, in fact, listening on Wednesday, regardless of when you're listening, welcome. This is a safe space to listen with openness, with realness, with no judgment, with no preconceptions, with just your soul ears from your heart. I tend to be in my head a lot. My mental field is always active and strong, and I know a lot of it is because of how I'm engineered and designed, but I'm learning the value of really just sinking into my heart most of the time to stay present and aware. And today I have some thoughts about identity formation, identity death, and identity resurrection, I guess you could say. To back up, I'm in my 50s. I had a major awakening at age 49. I'm now 53. So about 4 years ago, coming up on 4 years. And I will define spiritual awakening as I see it. But leading up to this moment in time where nothing was ever the same, the line in the sand, the moment where I realized, hey, I can't unsee or unknow what I now know. And I'm tired of running from what I know, from my own intuition. Prior to that and leading up to that, I had a series of events in my life that literally everything that I held dear, everything that I knew and believed that was dear to me came up on the chopping block or came to a shadow space where it wasn't as illuminated as it was before. Kind of like the rug getting ripped underneath you, the unraveling of the knowing. So spiritual awakening to me, and I know everyone defines it differently, it has nothing to do with other people. It has very little to do with your exterior circumstances. It's largely an inner jolt, an inner journey, culminating in, of course, your outer circumstances being called to question because you don't see things the same anymore. For me, it was years leading up to little nigglings inside, little nudgings, little, that doesn't feel right for years and years and years, but not in a space where I had readiness to actually climb in and ask, why doesn't this feel right? Why am I stuffing this when it doesn't feel right? For years and years leading up to this place at age 49, coming into age 50, where I went, I don't know who I am anymore. And I have to laugh about it. I mean, you'd have to kind of keep it light, but like how I had formed my identity was based around my roles and what I had created to that point, which was a lot. I mean, I'm a high achiever. I had a large family, a large business. Lots of projects had come to fruition and some really dear relationships and also religion that kept me safe and anchored in a certain set of belief systems, which I cherished and still do to this day. But something was awakening within me that was alchemical. And I knew it. I knew that the caterpillar soup, the metamorphosis, like I was coming undone. And this is terrifying. These are the things that lead up to a spiritual awakening. It's really hard to define. As you know, I'm like taking forever to define it. You're shedding old beliefs, identities, until there's a line of demarcation. I call it a line in the sand, whatever you want to call it metaphorically, where you can't go back anymore to the way that it used to be, to the things you used to believe, to the ways you used to see yourself, to the ways you used to see life, relationships, your physical incarnation, everything. This age-old question, who am I? I want to propose to you that this is a question that we're essentially programmed to ask as we pass through life. We're literally designed to ask this question. We're engineered to ask this question. I listened to a podcast recently where he talked about our brains are wired to pray. Our brains are wired to pray. So we're always having this conversation with either our higher self or God that we're unaware of. It's just the way the networking happens. And so we come questioning, we come praying, we come asking, we come petitioning, we come longing into this world. And we're literally designed to ask the question of who we are. We're engineered to ask this question. So our spiritual blueprint, the core design of our soul, was created to reach toward an understanding of our identity. We were created to seek and search out who we are. And people do it very differently depending on your actual wiring and what you value. For some of it's more like scraping and clawing our way to this realization throughout our lifespans. And as we pass through seasons, we have a series of identity crises. So there's the adolescent one, which is oftentimes one of our first on our soul journey, where we're like, where do I fit in? And then you've heard of the midlife crisis, where it's very similar to the adolescent identity crisis, but instead of like, where do I fit in, the who am I becomes bigger than your peer group of where you fit in. It's where do I fit in with the cosmos? Many life transitions precipitate this awakening in you, or this asking, because the reason I'm bringing up identity as it relates to awakening is because they go hand in hand. Usually at some point in midlife, we cannot tolerate illusion anymore. We recognize that what we've built as our identity may or may not be authentic to who we actually are. The whole reason I started this podcast, I literally started it 1 month after I turned 50. I thought I was going to implode if I couldn't talk some of these things out, because I didn't really have a close mentor I had many of them, but I didn't have a close mentor who was walking me through this dark night of this new identity formation and this rapid descent into an identity death. Some of you may have heard my podcast episode where I talked about my ayahuasca journey. That was back in February of 2021. I don't know when the episode aired, but it was maybe a month or so after that. I experienced an unraveling leading up to that point. But when I actually went through the experience, it was like a death simulation. The last night in Costa Rica, after 4 nights in a row of taking this medicine, which again, I do not advocate for everyone to do, but that was just what my soul was calling me to do. It was just the final break for me to get out of the heady analysis and fear programming and unconsciousness that was driving me into staying inauthentic. I should say that was keeping me in this prison of staying inauthentic. So these identity crises, they come on when we have nowhere else to go but within. We can't keep defining ourselves by our resources that we allocate or that we amass. We can't define ourselves by our creations at all. That's just all exterior, like Christ taught. The kingdom of heaven doesn't come by observation. It doesn't come by looking at what's around you and observing it. It comes from within. So the kingdom of God could be a metaphor also for what is happening inside your queendom or kingdom within as you discover your own wisdom and your own intuition. So by the time you hit midlife, if you're a true seeker and you're truly wanting to have a very strong spiritual foundation, you will experience some undoing. Because that need, that drive to discover our identity is so strong that when we are living in contrast to our true identity, we experience imbalance, we experience malaise and stress. And I would say it almost becomes intolerable. When we're confronted with a situation where our identity is questioned, our true identity is coming into question, there is a breach. And our spirits seek to draw us to places that would show us what our true identities are. So it's not something we ever really arrive at, like a realization. It's more like this internal unfolding, this process, each life lesson and circumstance teaching us who we are, line upon line, one level of understanding building upon another. And we can't fully comprehend who we are right now. It's impossible. We are multidimensional beings. We live in a 3-dimensional reality, a 3-dimensional plane, and we're limited in being able to get to a full understanding of our true identity. We can have glimpses. If you're searching for thought forms, in other words, thinking constructs, the mind to tell you who you are, you'll never get there. There's not adequate words in our language systems to define who we actually are. It's to be experienced. I actually once heard a female teacher say during one of her seminars, if we could peek inside the layers of the universe, having a fullness of our creation revealed to us and see who we really are, we would fall to our knees in amazement. The truth is, our blueprints are magnificent. We might never arrive at a complete realization. We could come to a place in our lives where, line upon line reaches like a tipping point, like it did for me at age 49, coming to age 50, and then a shift in our consciousness occurs. But there needs to be a process of awakening in order for us to come to a peaceful, grounded sense of our place in this universe. And we might never have a full realization in this life of our full magnificence of who we are multidimensionally, but we will have intermittent bursts or windows of our spiritual essence, and that serves a purpose. We are veiled from the knowledge and awareness of who we actually are for a divine purpose. It's so that we can actually listen to the call of our soul and the call of our universe to expand. And that means facing the shadows of the reality of this 3D plane, facing our programming, facing our unconscious beliefs that aren't serving us, facing our intergenerational trauma that we've put on a shelf for most of our lives, and even maybe previous lifetimes, whatever your belief system is with that. So this is not accomplished through thinking. You can't think your way through a spiritual awakening. It's an embodied experience. It's a shift in consciousness. So for many of you, it might be happening right now. I would say for most of us it is, because humanity is undergoing a really difficult initiation right now, a dark night of the soul, because something new is going to be rebirth, which means the old identities for institutions, systems, constructs, cultures, all the things, those are unraveling. So it's creating a disruption in the social order as these old social paradigms and institutions start to disintegrate. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. There's beautiful systems and institutions out there, but the ones that are not grounded in love and higher consciousness and inclusivity and seeing the magnificence of all souls without elitism, those are going to start to come down. They already are. I've been studying this for a while, but I believe we're hitting this apex in this time in history of the earth where this is now the golden supreme opportunity to respond to this evolutionary awakening of global consciousness, to activate the inner feminine, the lost feminine inside of us, the lost sacred masculine inside of us. And if these are new constructs to you, I'm sure for most of you they aren't, because a lot of people are talking about it, the yin, the yang, even the polarities that we're experiencing and all the complexities with paradigm shifting and paradox. What I'm really talking about is your personal blueprint, your personal construct of the divine feminine and divine masculine, your personal yin yang, your unique code, your unique blueprint. The properties of this blueprint, it's inalterable, unchangeable. Doesn't mean that you can't expand it, but at its core, you are a fixed, loving being. This seed that we carry, there's nothing you can do to change your actual divine identity. It's already been created in spirit form, if you will. There's always room for soul expansion. But what I'm really talking about is beyond like the collection of the experiences that reside in your soul. Your soul holds it all, the shadow and the light. What I'm really talking about is that beautiful, holy seed within you. It's already been created. The elements are in place from a divine source, and they are eternal and unchanging. We can alter our bodies and we can gather experiences onto our souls, but we cannot alter the essence of our spirit in its seed form. Our souls are interacting with the unmutable laws of the universe. These laws aren't confining, they are expanding. They expand us. They operate in light, peace, intelligence, and above all, love. You are love, light, wholeness, and truth. I'm actually going to be changing the name of this podcast really soon, because when I started this, I was seeking for wholeness. What I didn't realize 3.5 years ago when I started this podcast, well, maybe I did realize it, but I didn't actually form I was on my own soul journey of still seeking and seeking and seeking. And now I recognize that we don't have to seek for our wholeness. We just have to uncover it, let it be what it is, because it's already there. We already are wholeness. If you were anything different at your core than a divine seed, you could never have incarnated. You would not be here. It would go against the law of creation. So to be able to understand our true identity, it's vital to look at the literal descent for all of us as souls, the coming down to this plane, this lower plane, albeit a beautiful plane of existence. Not only is the planet undergoing this spiritual awakening or this dark night of the soul, but each of us are going through mini or major dark nights of the soul on a regular basis just because the energy is changing so fast. I just listened to a really interesting TED Talk, February 23rd, 2014 by Phil Borges. He's a filmmaker and photographer that documented indigenous and tribal cultures for like 25 years. So he interviewed all these indigenous people. The name of the TED Talk is Psychosis or Spiritual Awakening. Before I tell you about what he uncovered in his research, I need to tell you that when I was going through my own spiritual awakening, having been a devout religious person for my entire life, almost 5 decades, I thought I was going insane. And to be honest, so did a lot of the people around me, closest to me. You can Google all kinds of things on, signs of a spiritual awakening, but what we see universally is there is a very strong mental disruption. So I want to tell you that the best mentors for me were those who were telling me I was perfect, on target. This is exactly what unraveling looks like. This is exactly what unplugging from the matrix looks like. This is exactly what spiritual awakening looks like. You're shedding, like being a sponge, being squoze, and whatever needs to come out is coming out. And it's not pretty. Actually quite messy. But I'd been taught my whole life that that's not spiritual. That messiness is not spiritual. Having it all together and smiling and looking pleasant and having peace was more spiritual. So yeah, it got ugly. Like for all intents and purposes, most people wouldn't have realized unless you were really close to me. But I avoided people like the plague. I isolated. I still did the things as a mom and ran my business and all the stuff. But in my quiet moments, I was coming apart. I look back on that time as there were key people that showed up on my path who were able to literally midwife me through this awakening. Not to say that I think I'm totally woke right now, but I am not the same person that I was 4 years ago. Okay, back to this TEDx talk. Psychosis or spiritual awakening. So he interviewed these indigenous peoples who had more of a shamanistic culture. And there were like 5 markers or 5 points that they went through that were universal. The first thing that happens is they get the call. For me, I can trace it back to what I call the call of the Magdalene. And that means many things to many people. But for me, I'm literally writing a book on this. Mary Magdalene, her archetype, her actual historical presence, being called on a sacred pilgrimage, not knowing why, everything lining up perfectly, following the red thread. I experienced the call of the Magdalene, and that looked like learning about the last Christian texts, the Gnostic texts, understanding Mary Magdalene's role in Christ consciousness during her time and her time in France, and all of the beautiful awakenings that happened within me, the hard ones, I can trace back after being there in France in 2018 on a sacred pilgrimage to trace her steps. That's the first thing. People get the call. And in the indigenous cultures, it's typically something about being a healer or shaman for their tribes. But here's what's interesting. This researcher said that these people that get this call, quote unquote, the call, capital C, almost always precipitated by a deep psychological crisis. Almost always they had a mentor, someone who's been through it and come out of the other side. So first they get the call, precipitated by some kind of deep psychological crisis, or in my case, and probably many others, the crisis continues for an elongated period of time. That is often called the dark night of the soul. Someone who's been through it and come out on the other side is the only person qualified to be a mentor for someone in this chrysalis, this caterpillar soup, this undoing, this psychological crisis, because they've heard a call and they're now answering it. And that puts them on a completely different trajectory than the group think. Then after they have this mentor who's been through it and come out the other side and sort of holding space for them, they have to face this initiation, which happens to be death of the old self, rebirth of the new self. And what that looks like was different for everyone. It's just basically like identity death, like who I thought I was versus who I am. and expanding of consciousness, but some kind of wrestle with identity. That's what the death and rebirth cycle is all about. And this was interesting to me. In these indigenous tribes, they learn to go into the spirit world, which informs them of our reality here, what's actually going on here. They get the information and then they come back. Then they become healers in their communities and therefore mentors for other people who will be going through that same dark night. So this whole initiation process, what I find fascinating is that in these shamanic cultures, they have more context around this process. They don't stigmatize it. They have community that buys into what they're going through and have gone through, and they celebrate it almost, or they are in awe of it, or it's reverential to them. In my case, it became a disintegration of a lot of my religious, not values, but beliefs, because everything was being called into question. Every belief I had, I was getting this reboot on what do you actually know in your body, or how does this feel in your body? I was shunned by many people. People were trying to save me and rescue me. I wish that religions would celebrate this more. I wish that cultures would celebrate this more. It's just usually a black sheep type of label that gets put on people who are going through and who see what's happening and who feel it in their bodies and who are facing the shadows and diving into the questions, and then the energy underneath the questions and the doubts. For the larger cultures, especially in religions, if they don't think that it's fostering faith, they reject it. When in fact, for me, going on the path of questioning everything was the biggest leap of faith I had ever taken and will ever take. Phil Borges, who did this research, he called this the shamanic advantage, this ability that these indigenous cultures had to normalize and even revere people going through these psychological crises rather than trying to medicate them, ostracize them, shun them, counsel them, therapize them. All that they do is guide them and hold space for them so that this unfolding and this death and rebirth can happen in a natural, organic way, in a spiritual way. Medications, numbness. I was a hair's breadth many times from going and getting on a medication during this time, like a psychoactive medication. Instead, I listened, I felt. And I'm not judging those who do go on the medications, because I do think that they offer a strong container of support for people, but it's a temporary brace. You will numb the core of the shadows with continued use of psychoactive substances, and I'm talking about SSRIs and anti-anxiety meds and things like that. I have never felt more depressed, and I had never felt more full of anxiety in my entire life, compounded and compounded and compounded. So what called to me, going back to this call thing, was to go do plant medicine in Costa Rica, ayahuasca. They say that there's this call that happens if you're meant to do this. And it so happens that I was actually supposed to go out and do this in 2020, but they canceled all trips because of COVID. So I took that year to prepare myself even further, feel more, take more mentors and programs and mystery schools into my life that helped ground me into like, you're not crazy. But the next year, 2021 February, I was in Costa Rica, and I knew that this is what my soul wanted me to experience and what the next step of my journey needed to be. So calls come to us for a variety of reasons. I'm glad I didn't go in 2020. I may have had a really severe snap, but I had that extra year to really look and go deep on what am I not seeing about myself? They call this sometimes an ego death. An ego death is a process, not an event, but it so happened I had a severe ego death in Costa Rica the very last night, 4 nights of doing the medicine. And it wasn't somebody sitting there talking to me. It was an inner process, and I could see my shadows, and I could see what programs I was still running that were not going to continue to serve me. And it's taken a year and a half to integrate that experience. So this dying and rebirth process happens sometimes on a daily basis. But when you're going through a true dark night, it's imperative that let me back up. This will not come to you. This call will not come to you, and this dark night will not come to you, and this death and rebirth cycle thing will not fully come to you until 2 things are in place. And the universe is brilliant at determining the readiness before you consciously are. But one is that you're now open. You now see that you're unhappy, or that things need to change, or that something needs to go because you cannot continue to go on like this. And that could be a life event that happens that really awakens you to that. The second thing is you have to have some form of psychological readiness. The dark night, you don't seek it out. You never would. You never would seek out an identity death. It comes to you. And Andrew Harvey talks a lot about this in his work, that it's almost like a crucifixion within yourself, dying to the old and being reborn to the new. And it comes to you. That's the differentiation between just like a really hard life event and your initiation into an identity death. So it will come when it is ready and when you are ready. And some of this preparation takes place over many, many years. And depending again on your belief systems, lifetimes. Some of the stuff that we're clearing, looking at and facing is an accumulative thing that's been residual in not just our own pre-existent self, meaning our own multidimensional self across many lifetimes or dimensions, all that mysterious stuff, but also your ancestral lines. One of the things that really, really helped me as I was going through some of the worst parts of this was just the realization that I couldn't blame anyone. I couldn't blame my family construct or my religious construct or my culture or the government or schools, or I couldn't blame anyone because my soul chose this. The circumstances that I was facing to have to die to, I wanted this for my soul's own expansion and my own evolution. And it's very much still a work in progress, and I still get triggered quite a bit, lest you think I have it all figured out. But just the dawning of the realization that I need to change the name of this podcast, because I am no longer seeking wholeness, nor am I going to coach other women or men to seek it. It's more about embracing it. So looking ahead to that name change, I will be revealing sometime this early fall. But I guess wanted to, for any of you who are in these spiritual emergency situations, just help to reframe a little bit for you what might actually be happening. I do have a women's wisdom circle that I'm starting just because small groups are so powerful for people who are in transition like this or who are being initiated. Going back to what I said before, the universe will not send you the full line in the sand moment, if you will, until there's readiness. And that looks like community. That looks like you have support in place for people who will affirm that you are in the right place, that you're not going crazy, keep you safe, help you bounce off your reality and what you're experiencing in your inner terrain, and what might be happening on the outside that looks messy is ultimately going to culminate in your own growth, to put you squarely on the path of what you are meant to do, feel, be, and experience in this lifetime, which is probably more than you can comprehend right now. I'm still trying to form that in my head. And again, that's what I started this podcast episode with, is like, I'm in my head a lot and I'm learning to just get, if I overthink it too much, it becomes quite overwhelming. But when I feel into it, of what's happening in the earth, I can literally feel in my root and lower chakras a sense of belonging that I've never felt before. And it has nothing to do with the communities around me that had kept me safe previously. It's belonging to myself, belonging to this earth, belonging to my creator, understanding that the divine father, the divine mother, and the divine child in pure connection within me, inalterable, inconceivable, really, this inner holy trinity. That might sound a little esoteric to a lot of you, but I think some of you will get what I'm saying. We are all playing out the Christ story inside of ourselves, the Christ consciousness story. We're all on that path. Being in the wilderness for 40 days, being buffeted, coming into our own, learning who we are, coming out the other side like they do in these indigenous cultures, knowing who you are, having a sense of identity, and then having that identity be challenged over and over and over until finally you suffer on the cross inside of yourself. You get crucified, you get annihilated. But yet in that annihilation, you are fully held and fully supported and fully seen, even though it feels like and seems like by all outside indicators that you are not, that you're utterly alone. And you cry out, God, why have you forsaken me? And who are you? And what are you doing? And what is this all about? This deep disorientation is part of the awakening. And then after a series of time, I mean, metaphorically 3 days in the grave, part of the call of the Magdalene to me is that the Christ came to Mary Magdalene first. So the divine masculine meets the divine feminine. And they say, let's go out now. Let's inform others of our reality, of the reality of what's actually happening, which is that the kingdom is within themselves. Just like that indigenous process that I shared earlier about these people who become healers in their communities. They died, they were initiated, they died to their old self, they were rebirthed into a new self, they went to the spirit world, which informs them of our reality here, and got the information and came back. So they become healers in their communities. What I was told about the Christ path, which was largely fear and shame based, sadly, now the Christ path, the Christ consciousness path, the Magdalene path, it's very illuminated for me and very alive in me as I continue to embrace my own worthiness and my own wholeness. So whatever speaks to you, whatever archetypes, myths, legends, stories, all these things that are alive in our consciousness that have been handed down, whatever speaks to you about your own individuation from the culture and your own awakening and your own unplugging from the matrix and the groupthink, to become the highest version of yourself, your own divine blueprint being built, expressed, that seed of consciousness that's so pure and so divine, that's ready to illuminate this world. It's a sacred path for each one of us. So when you see somebody and it looks like they're going a little crazy, maybe just offer your non-judgment and your love and support. The people who were closest to me who saw this unraveling happen were very concerned for me, and I am so grateful that they were. And also, it is trauma. It is an accessing of deep cellular trauma that, took me by surprise, to be honest. But it was the people who were just like, I see you. I see who you are. I feel you. I'm with you. That was so affirming and so comforting. And I hope to be that presence for others now as they experience the death and rebirth cycle on their own divine timing. So back to my Women's Wisdom Circle. You can find it on my website under Work With Me. There's a wait list happening. I'm hoping to launch it at the beginning of the year. We'll see how my book writing goes, but maybe in early 2023. But I am gathering a wait list for this right now because I recognize that there will be a lot more people who are shedding and who are needing more of a container to be able to be in a community, a tribe that allows them to safely express and emote and have something to anchor into as they go through these initiations on a soul level. So that's what I intuitively felt to share with you today. I hope that each of you will find that pearl and that diamond, that divine essence within through all the muck and layers and residue that we accumulate in this really dense space that we're living in. But also I'm looking out my window right now and I'm seeing butterflies, I'm seeing mountains, and I'm seeing beauty. And I think for me, it's just, where can I find the beauty in this mess? It's always, always there. When you're in the caterpillar soup, when you're in the chrysalis, when you're metamorphosizing, it's not always clear and you can't always see, and it's violent. It's a violent process oftentimes when we're in places of more resistance in this identity death. But when we allow it to unfold and we find the containers that support us in it, it's actually a thrilling roller coaster ride to be on. It makes you feel alive. It makes you feel like you can suffer with consciousness and with a stable sense of who you really, really are at your core. So have a glorious week. Continue to follow me on Instagram, Cherie.Burton. I'm going to be dropping more and more truth bombs as I get braver and braver, at least truth as I know it. And for those of you who are in it, I'm with you. Until next week, keep going strong.